Good evening. I think we'll get started since it looks like everyone's here and seated and ready to go. My name is Nicole Watson, and I am the director of the Catherine G. Murphy Gallery. We're going to begin tonight by being mindful that we are gathered on land that is sacred to the Dakota people, who have lived here for centuries and continue to live here. Thank you for joining us for this evening's Curators Talk. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Heather Carroll, who put together our current show, Roots and Fruits, exploring the history and impact of the Women's Art Registry of Minnesota. During tonight's talk, Heather will discuss her methodologies and approach to organizing this historic exhibition, which combines period artworks and archival materials to trace pivotal events in the early history of the registry, known as WARM, and explore some of the ways its members catalyze local art movements, programs, and artists. Before I turn things over to Heather, I thought I'd take a few moments to tell you a little bit about her. She is a recent alumna of St. Kate's. She graduated in last May with a master's in library and information science. She also received a museum studies certificate from the University of St. Thomas in 2018, and she has a BFA in studio art from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. In addition to serving as a graduate assistant for the St. Catherine University Fine Art Collection, Heather has received archival experience at the Weissman Art Museum, the Hennepin County Library, the American Craft Council, and the Society of American Archivists Student Chapter. She implemented and led the Warm Journal digitization project, work that certainly played a role in igniting her desire to investigate the origins of the collective and consider its influences today. Heather is a tireless and patient researcher. She has boundless curiosity, and she keeps a constant, keen eye toward drawing meaningful connections between art, history, and society. Now she is also a subject matter expert of WARM. Please join me in welcoming Heather Carroll.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. I'm Heather, and I'm the curator of Roots and Fruits, exploring the history and impact of the Women's Art Registry of Minnesota. First, I'd like to thank Nicole Watson, Kimberly Roth, Dr. Jamie Yar, Ann Buchan, Jennifer Adam, and the Art and Art History student workers for their help with this project.
Heather, could you speak up, please?
Oh, I'll try. Is this better? No, does this not help?
So you will need to project over.
Okay. Back row, I'm going to talk to you, all right? All right. So I thought I'd start with a nutshell story about myself and my circuitous route to be here giving a curator's talk tonight for this exhibition. I was born in Minneapolis and I grew up in Lauderdale, that little square mile town where Hennepin Avenue turns into Larpenteur Avenue. My father is a Vietnam vet who left our family when I was 8. My 2 brothers and I were raised by my tenacious and extraordinarily resourceful mother. I went to school in Roseville, where at the time, music, theater, and visual arts were a priority. This is really good because the very first thing I ever wanted to be was an artist. I went to Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where WARM member Elizabeth Erickson was my advisor, teacher, and mentor. As I recall it, she was the only one to say to me, "Yes," and "I see," where others would say, "You should," or "You need to." That was very formative for me. I graduated in 1997, but I couldn't really afford to actually be a full-time artist. So for a couple of years after graduating, I worked in academic services department at MCAD, where I installed exhibitions, ran the off-campus exhibition program, and taught students to do the same. In 1999, I was the TA for the first Women's Art Institute, and around the same time, I received a career opportunity grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board to be a visiting artist at the Byrne College of Art in Ballyvaughan, Ireland. Yeah, right? I mean, yeah. I thought I might travel the world bouncing between visiting artist gigs, but even with the grant and trading work for a room to stay in, I came back from that first attempt in more debt than I left with. Oops. So I then found what felt like an art-related job, and I worked for Blue Dot Design and Manufacturing for over a decade. mostly in sales and service. It was an exciting time of massive growth for the company, and I was exposed to the inner workings at the intersection of multiple industries, such as design, architecture, manufacturing, business, and entrepreneurship, most of which were and still are male-dominated industries. It was during that time that I channeled my mother's resourcefulness and realized that I loved spreadsheets and organizing, that I loved to make information accessible and learn to create systems and processes. But eventually I burnt out. So around a decade ago, as my husband and I were starting a family and I was seeking a more flexible and satisfying career, I read a very businessy, I read a very businessy book about strengths, recommended by my businessy older brother, who said that it had changed his life. I learned that it was more effective to fully utilize your strengths than to bang your head against the wall trying to incrementally improve upon your weaknesses. Or in much simpler Zen-like terms, just be your true, authentic self. Stepping back to look at myself like this and my habits afforded me some distance and the ability to sidestep some of my previous personal roadblocks. But that is a whole other discussion for another time. And so to keep it short, here's what happened next. A job posting came up at MIA that I really, really wanted, but I really, really wasn't qualified for. And a serendipitous library salon event at the American Craft Council on the topic of using libraries as incubators for creativity led me to the Masters of Library and Information Science program here at St. Kate's. Circuitous, right? Yeah. I knew my path in the MLIS program would not be a typical one because I wanted to focus on objects and art rather than traditional public library services, and I happily ended up in the archives and special collections track. My goal became to spend my 9-to-5 career being the person who actually gets to touch all the things, right? And behind the scenes, and then making these things accessible to people, all the people, not just the scholars. And this atypical interest led me to two things. First, a project to digitize the Warm journals, and second, a graduate assistantship with St. Kate's Fine Art Collection, where I started by cataloging and digitizing artworks and investigating provenance. While working with the Warm journals, I kept coming across names of Warm artists whose artwork are in St. Kate's collection, and Warm artists who were St. Kate's alumni. In both the journal and the art collection, I came across so many names of Warm artists and other women artists who were educators, administrators, and activists across the state and nationally. I started to draw connections across time, and in turn, to see my own relationship to this local and national history. Again, trying to keep this short and to sum up what I was finding, the national feminist art movement of the 1970s and 80s is directly connected to Minnesota through the activities and members of WARM. This local history is like a web of connections that I, and probably many of you too, keep bumping into. Whether I knew to look for that web or not, it was always there. As these interconnections became apparent, I also realized that Minnesota's feminist art movement is largely undocumented. This was shocking to me, and I still can't believe that no one else has attempted this already. And I knew that I needed to find a way to share this, and an art exhibition felt the most appropriate way to start. The ideas for this exhibition were percolating the whole time that I was working with St. Kate's Fine Art Collection, and I submitted the exhibition proposal just weeks after the last presidential election. Inauguration. I was at the Women's March in St. Paul that day after the inauguration. It was amazing to be a drop in the pink ocean that day, but I struggled afterward with how I could continue to contribute. I'm not a politician, and I'm not able to be a philanthropist. And there are a million ways to be an activist, but I find social media is really a drag. What I tend to find most inspiring and activating are stories. Inspiring stories of real people represented by the art and the objects they create. You probably get where I'm going with this. But it dawned on me that I could use art to share history, perhaps even to inspire others toward action and connection. There continues to be a sense of urgency in this project. a little voice whispering, and I won't whisper, you have to do this before it's gone, before we can't get to it anymore. Go get it. Art made by women has historically been and continues to be underrepresented in the art world and online. The Women's Art Registry of Minnesota, or WARM, began in 1973 as a collective of artists to combat this inequity, as well as provide a supportive and productive environment for women artists in Minnesota. WARM began as a non-hierarchical artists collective and slide registry, but grew to include a gallery, a self-published journal, a visiting lecture series, a mentor program, a national conference, and more. WARM continues to support women artists today as the Women Art Resources of Minnesota. My first introduction to the history of WARM was this exhibition catalog by Johanna Englert. The brief history of the collective that is included in this book was a springboard into 100 new questions for me. That being said, most of my questions at the time fell into two main categories. First, how did WARM begin? And next, what effect did WARM have? To answer the first question, I hit the local archives, like all of them. I felt in order to tackle how WARM began, I had to have a firm grasp of what happened when and who was involved. I started with the Minnesota Historical Society's archives, where the official records of WARM are housed, and then branched out to the University of Minnesota and Wiseman Art Museum archives, and the archives at St. Catherine University and Minneapolis College of Art and Design. At the Minnesota Historical Society alone, there are over 18 banker-sized boxes of documents and materials in the WARM records. If you figure 30 folders per box and 20 documents per folder, that's almost 11,000 documents to sift through. Daunting. To keep the process efficient, I really had to use my librarian skills. First, I primarily focused on items dated between 1973 and 1976, which brought the number of boxes down to 5. Next, I kept my time in the archives to 1 to 2 hour stints, where I skimmed the documents, only skimmed. My last efficiency tactic, when I found a promising item, I would capture it with a smartphone scanner app. Then later, as my schedule permitted, I would organize the scans, pore over the materials, and tease out relevant names, dates, events, and statistics, and anything else. However, much of the earliest information was not in the archival records. For this, I interviewed and corresponded with Susan Feeney, Lynn Lockey, and Diane McLeod, who were among the earliest members and were very gracious in sharing their stories and recollections. Many of the details they shared sent me on new and productive research paths. Again, I used those librarian skills to curate the masses of information into about 8 historical moments, each one of which significantly contributed to WARM's trajectory. One of the best sources of information about the earliest years turned out to be the handwritten meeting minutes. They're actually over here on the side. And I lost my spot. For WARM's turned out to be the handwritten meeting minutes from WARM's almost weekly gatherings between 1975 and 1976. The frequency of meetings made it fairly straightforward to track the progression of projects and ideas, but at other times it was like finding a needle in a haystack. Because the collective was non-hierarchical, committees changed members frequently. This helped avoid hierarchy and helped offer as much experience to all the members as possible. But it sure did make it a lot harder for me to track the contributions of individuals. And in the process, I also realized that that was probably exactly the collective's point. It's a we, not a me. This timeline of 8 moments looks simple and straightforward, but in reality, it is a complex topic dealing with politics and lots of personalities at a charged time in history. From my research, I learned of many tensions, but one that I found particularly paralyzing had to do with the curatorial decisions in a previous exhibition having to do with how WARM, as a large non-hierarchical organization, was represented to the public through the work of a few artists. And I knew that I would have to approach this exhibition differently and very thoughtfully and from the perspective of those being represented. It was always my intention to work directly with the artists to gather works for the show, but as a fallback, I also spent a significant amount of time attempting to locate Warm artists' works in local museums and collections. And this gave me the security to know that no matter how things might shake out, I could put together an exhibition about Warm. For the physical exhibition, those two main research questions became two distinct parts of one exhibition: the roots of Warm and the fruits of Warm. This works out particularly well because the Catherine G. Murphy Gallery has two gallery spaces separated by a reception area, the two lines of questioning, and two spaces to reflect the different curatorial process for each question. The Roots Gallery focuses on the beginning points of different stages in Warm's early trajectory. In Warm's early history and the women involved in those beginnings. This portion of the exhibition is laid out like a timeline, using both period artwork and archival materials to represent the moments that punctuate Warm's early history. While today, and especially with art, less linear display methods tend to be favored, I feel that in this situation the timeline provides simple access points and an overall visual rhythm to the gallery. Each point in the timeline begins with an archival poster and a didactic panel, or four, followed by artworks related to the timeline event by the artists who were involved. And when those actual works may not have been available, we worked to find art from the same time period by the same artists involved. These formal constraints significantly aided in narrowing the focus and the possible items that would be on display. This method also, to a pretty great degree, curbs the curator's power by removing most of the preferential choices of the process, and employs a non-hierarchical method more reflective of the collective itself. It was important to me to use archival materials in the historic exhibition for a few reasons. First, I love the objects and the stories that they tell without needing much further explanation. A lot of archival materials are common and very relatable. Most of us can relate to signing our name on a list, using a notebook, taking a photograph, and even perhaps writing a letter. Most of us here have written a letter, right? Yeah. Archival materials, and these are the bits and pieces of Warm's history that we physically know in our own lives. Archival materials are also a time capsule. In the case of slide transparencies, many of the visitors to this exhibition won't know what a slide is yet. And yet, slides were an integral part of artists' careers for the latter half of the 20th century, and they were the basis of Warm's registry in the beginning. So it was really important to have an interactive element with slides to meaningfully provide that context to the audience. All of these archival objects lend both authenticity and authority to the timeline events and to the overall story. The key challenges in the roots part of the exhibition were in setting the parameters that narrow the scope without diminishing the story, providing logical access points to the audience, and respecting and representing the non-hierarchical structure and inclusivity of Warm as an organization. The fruits side traces Warm's threads of influence. Warm members went on to begin new arts organizations, to teach, and to spread the power of art and art making to even broader audiences. Some of those influenced by Warm members are in turn sharing the spirit of community, equality, and inclusion through art and art making. Conceptually, the threads all needed to cover different realms of influence. What is probably less apparent in this side of the exhibition is that each thread had some sort of personal connection for me. Wet Paint was a favorite art store long before I knew its connection to Warm member Beth Bergman. Carroll Fisher was a faculty member at MCAD when I was a student. I was a part of the first Women's Art Institute, and I knew Monica Rudquist as faculty here at St. Kate's before I knew that she was also a member of the Warm Gallery and was also Phyllis Wiener's mentee. Wait, I had that written differently. These threads are like evidence hung on the wall of my personal revelations about the impact of Warm. evidence that I am continually bumping into warm and its influences. So, cosmic nudge taken. Yeah. Curatorially, the fruit side, the artists included in the fruit side could choose their own work within very loose parameters, mostly constrained only by space. And in some cases, artists at the beginning or the middle of a thread, actually most cases, artists at the beginning or middle of a thread were asked to nominate an artist for the end point of the thread, someone they had worked with in some capacity who embodied what they considered to be a contemporary spirit of warm. So as a curator, I laid out the structure and communicated the idea, but it was the artists who chose how to represent themselves. While these threads do have a personal connection for me, I also knew that there would be, quite literally, hundreds of other stories out there that were just as significant, relevant, and important. I knew I wanted to find a way to include as many warm artists and stories as possible, and this became the digital slideshow in the fruit side. This is just a wonderful picture. I credit this idea to Joyce Lyon, who, as part of producing a very similar slideshow for warm gallery members that was in conjunction with the 2013 exhibition titled The House We Built. The slideshow for The House We Built was one of those wonderfully serendipitous moments in research and wholly indicative of the generosity of the women of Warm. After a panel discussion about the Arts Corps program last year here at St. Kate's, Joyce gave the DVD containing the slideshow to Nicole Watson to give to me. There are more than 600 slides in that presentation, and so many images, biographies, and stories. In my first viewing, I soaked it all in, trying to read every bit. 2 hours in, I was slowing down when I came to the paintings of Patricia Neer. I stopped at this painting, titled Suspended Figure After Tintoretto. Tears welled up in me. This woman This woman, animate but bound and blind, struggling against something she can't see or understand enough to escape from. She can only feel it, and without the bindings that confine her, she will fall. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. And toward what? We don't know. I recognized that, and I felt that at some point, or maybe many points, I have metaphorically been that woman. I felt that I was only just starting to understand the constructs around us that constrain women, historically and contemporarily. I recognized this as a larger motif in women's artwork. I had come across it in the Warm journals. In the work of Harmony Hammond, who exhibited at the Warm Gallery in 1980. In the work of contemporary local artists like Sarah Kusa, who is a Women's Art Institute alumni and currently a Jerome Emerging Artist Fellow. And in Marjorie Fedegin, and I'm sorry I butchered that pronunciation probably, whose work is currently on display at the Hopkins Center for Art. Patricia Neer's painting was the first artwork I envisioned to be in the Roots and Fruits exhibition. And with further research, it turned out that this painting was actually a part of Warm Gallery's very first exhibition. And it exactly fit within the parameters that I was laying out. Serendipity. This painting inspired the idea for the salon layout, and it became a visual anchor for that wall, which represents Warm Gallery's inaugural exhibition in 1976. This painting, in a sense, became my mascot through the planning and curation of Roots and Fruits, a visual reminder of that little voice whispering, go get it, keep going. And I will keep going. This exhibition is a beginning. There are digital exhibitions to be made, a digital exhibition catalog to put together, hopefully an oral history project, and eventually a more complete history in book form. This is just another beginning point. Thank you for coming tonight.
Does anyone have any questions for Heather?
I have one. Where were all these archival materials? You didn't take them from MHS?
We did actually loan them from MHS.
Oh.
Yes, so about, I'd say probably 25 to 30% of the ones in the display case are actually from MHS. Pat Olson gave me a lot of posters. Oh my God, the posters are amazing. I couldn't show all of them. Marty Nash gave me 5 boxes of things. So a lot of what's in there is from Marty Nash. Susan McDonald, that amazing drawing at the end of the display case, I think, about the special issues of underrepresented or oppressed groups. That was by Maria Mazzaro, who is a St. Kate's alumni, but Susan McDonald loaned that to us for this exhibition. And a lot of other people sent things. The slides are from Beth Bergman and from Diane McLeod, who's out in California now. And I mean, I have boxes of other things that people gave to me too. And hopefully that'll be the seed of an archival collection here at St. Kate's too. Any other questions?
It was impressive. Thank you so much for putting all of this together.
You're welcome. Thank you. So many familiar faces and so many that are in the exhibition. Thank you all.
So where do you go from here?
Right. Where do I go from here? I think the first next thing is actually putting the digital exhibition catalog together, because that will get all of the artworks and the didactic, which are basically the product of this research, out onto the web. And that format will then also be, searchable by Google, Bing, all of the search engines. So if anybody searches any of the names of the worm artists, this is something that will pop up. And because it will have a .edu at the end of it, initially I think that's through Scalar, and I'm pretty sure that's a .edu. Those automatically get bumped to the top of search engines. So, yay, go .edus. But I think really that's the first thing that really has to happen. More people need to know about this history.
So have you had a chance in putting this together to think about Warm's place in the larger national and international women's art movement?
Yeah.
Your thoughts about that?
My thoughts about that are like, WTF? We are not a flyover state, and everything that was going on here was in line with, and sometimes even ahead of, what was going on the coasts, and yet they are documented and written about, and that's why I cannot believe that this hasn't been done before. Like, yeah. So, I will make sure this happens. Hi.
I would love to hear more about what your vision is for oral history that you mentioned.
Right.
If there is one that's fully formed.
I don't know that it's fully formed, but I know that there isn't anybody who didn't offer to talk to me, who didn't answer my questions, who didn't want to tell their story. And I think an oral history is the best way to gather that information in people's own words, in their own time, and in their own way. And that would be the oral history project. I really feel has to happen first before the history, the more comprehensive history, can happen, because you need all of those different viewpoints to bring it all together. It would be a very large project. There were over 90, or just about 90 members of the gallery alone, and that doesn't include the at-large members, or I think there was a lower tier of member too. And of that, there were like a couple thousand, I think. So there are lots of warm stories out there. so we could get a very complete picture, I feel. But honestly, I don't know how to plan the project yet. I'm still learning that, but I know there are people around who can help me with that. There were.
Do you know anything about the timeline between the Air Gallery in New York and Warm, and if they interacted with each other at the time of their foundings?
Air happened slightly earlier, and actually, Warm is so freaking smart. They sent people out to Air and Artemisia and California to see how they were doing it, and then brought it all back and said, how do we want to set ours up? And so it was modeled mostly after, my understanding, after Air, and in the collective sense, rather than I think woman building was set up differently. Hi.
Thank you for a great talk tonight, great presentation. I'm also curious if you can speak to any other themes that emerged in the work, like you showed the bounding
Yeah.
work. Was there anything else that you noticed that may have emerged? Does that make sense?
Sure. There are lots of themes, especially relating to body, nature, and anthropomorphization of nature, and internal spaces, reflection. There were a lot of those, but oh no, I lost it. Themes. I know themes, but I lost the one that I had that was unusual, or like, I might come back to that as I remember it. Sorry. Were there any other?
She said point of view would be one of those.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a great one.
Thinking about the poster.
Yeah. Have you been through the exhibition yet? Oh, okay. Go look. Take a look at the Women's Erotic Art Show poster. It is a classic definition of subverting the male gaze. However, it's 3 years. It was produced 3 years before that phrase was even coined. Yeah. Not the one I was thinking of, but thank you. Any other questions?
I would suggest that you also look at the decision process that we went through to close the gallery, which was very emotional, maybe more emotional than opening the gallery, and a different group of people, and I think there, as you know, this whole subject is very emotionally charged for almost everyone involved with it, and the emotions on that end have never really been addressed.
I think most of one of the donations, the biggest donation of archival material that I got, relates mostly to those last few years. And when I was...
You will set some people free.
That sounds...
That's a challenge.
Accepted. I'll do it. This one I really wanted to focus on sort of the beginnings, though. I think a more complete history will also have to deal with evolutions and endings too. And that's the amazing thing about Warm. Like, it just keeps evolving and changing, and I hope it never goes away.
That's what I was going to ask you. It's still here, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's Warm Art Resources now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you're putting those two as one, so to speak, or...
They are technically the same organization. They changed the name in 1991 to better reflect what Warm was or is. It wasn't a registry anymore, because by 19 well, it was probably the mid-90s when people stopped using slides. I still have slides of my work. But
You have a slide projector, though.
I do not, but I have a whole bunch of little slide viewers. Like, I love them.
Historic.
Yeah. Al,
I have an archival question. So you said a lot of this is at MHS? But some is here, so where else are there
Oh.
archives, or are they primarily are you trying to get most of them in one spot, or?
So, the Minnesota Historical Society's collection, their primary focus are what they would call the organizational or business records of women's art resources of Minnesota, dating all the way back to 1973. Within that, there is some information, like artist files, right? But the papers for the individual artists, and often even the people who would have been. So eventually it wasn't non-hierarchical anymore either. So eventually those leaders and directors, their papers are sometimes there, but sometimes they are separate. And that has a lot to do with what the archivist thinks should be done with them. Like whether they should be this person's stuff or this group's stuff. And I think what I'd like to start here would be more akin to the Women's Art Archives of Minnesota, right? So this would be the papers of the women artists who come here, and that augments without overlapping too much what the Minnesota Historical Society has. The things that I used from, was it MCAD and the University of Minnesota and the Wiseman, those were more about exhibitions or artists who had exhibitions there. So.
So could I also add that the Archives of American Art of the Smithsonian in Washington
Oh, yeah.
has a small collection of foreign documents as well.
Which is really awesome.
Yeah, which is really swell. Basically, they were stuff in my drawers because I had a connection to a curator there. And I'll just add that last summer they put together from the Archives of American Art an exhibition in Washington at the Smithsonian of like an archival material from each state of the union, and they used a warm article, I think, from the Reader for Minnesota.
Yes.
Right. So there's that as well.
Awesome.
I'm just wondering if you would like to mention the show on the second floor gallery, which you also curated and is related to the show.
Well, there's not much to curate with that. I mean, on the
Just
second
it's worth
floor.
mentioning.
Yes, on the second floor there are all three of the 10 by 10 portfolios all together. And I think this is the first time they've all been shown together since the 80s.
Can you maybe explain what those are for people who aren't
Sorry,
familiar with the
10
portfolios?
10 by 10. The full title is 10 by 10, 10 prints by 10 artists. And they were all warm artists. And the portfolios were a way to get the work out to people, to gather new collectors, to go into the collections of museums, to make it more accessible to see women's art in your daily lives. And it's also, I think the fundraiser is still going on, which is for the Scholarship Fund for the Women's Art Institute. And you can talk to Pat, or there's information upstairs too.
Heather?
Yeah.
I'm Terry Hawthorne, and I've done some archival research at the Art Institute, particularly around the battered women's movement. And frequently, the stuff that goes into the History Society is when an office gets too small. It's mostly stuff that's passed on under crisis kinds of situations. And the files are pretty messy. And I just want to say that I'm so impressed that a real archivist is looking and trying to build and looking at what are the missing pieces. It is such an incredible gift as somebody who's played with those things, and they just don't have the benefit and the money to support them. So the question then that follows is, I see the real benefits of what you're doing, and how is it getting funded?
Thank you to my wonderful husband. And my kids for the, I am passionate about this, and I'll do it whether I get paid or not. But when I'm getting paid to do it, it definitely makes the process go faster. I am looking into grant funding. Most of the problem with that is that individuals can't apply for grant funding. Small fellowships here and there, but sorry. So I'm looking for organizations to help with that. I have recently learned that there is an oral history nonprofit that was started a year or two ago, and I think their specific aim is to help people like me be able to do projects, and they act as the conduit for the funds. So without the stipulations of, say, the Historical Society, where you have to, if you write something, they get first rights, or if you produce an oral history, it has to go into their collection. It can go someplace else too, but it has to go into their collection. So help fund those other things that fund things, right? Anyone else?
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, everyone.